It's great. It's great to talk to you, and I miss you, man.
I
I miss
miss
you.
you too. And
I
Tracy, man, I'd love to get out
Yeah.
there.
I kind of feel bad that I got myself into the middle of this, but you know me, like if I think something is true, good, bad, ugly, I'm gonna say it. And and
That's you.
and I will say just one thing that I want to clarify, which is there are two separate questions, which is like, are these various flare proposals good for and fair to XRP holders? And then there's a completely separate question, which is, are these proposals good for and fair to the Flare ecosystem and the health of the ecosystem long term and other Flare holders, people who buy Flare or get Flare in other ways? And they're separate questions. And it could very well be the case. I'm not quite sure it is, but this is the position I've kind of been leaning towards, that this is a little bit unfair to XRP holders and probably not the best for them, but it may well be in the best interest of the Flare ecosystem. And I can tell you, as someone who's been in this business and seen a project from preconception all the way through to maturity, there were a lot of things we thought would happen or we thought Ripple would do in the early days of the XRP ledger that we later either just couldn't do or realized were terrible for the health of the ecosystem. And you face a tough choice. Do you not do what people think? I mean, they're not really promises, but there are statements of intent. I presume made in good faith. I'm not going to hypothesize that like this is a scheme that like if they could plan this scheme out, they would have done it better. You know what I mean? Like they would have made it vaguer and
Yeah.
less like a commitment. And we would have too. Like we said, we do things they really thought, these are things that they really thought. And then they face this dilemma. Do I want to be perceived as being dishonest and not treating people fairly? Or do I want to do what's in the long term best interest of my project? And it's tough for everyone. Ripple expected to give away most of the XRP they were holding within 4 or 5 years, and we expected to do it through giveaways and charitable donations, and that just didn't work. It just wasn't a good strategy, and so we faced this choice of like, do we do something that's disastrous to our project, or do we get perceived as having broken promises to people? And I know most people in the space don't remember that because this was many years ago, and
I
and this, the
remember.
project is healthy. Yeah, I'm sure you were involved. Like there were things that we did that we felt really bad about. I mean, there are things that I really regret. The only thing that bothers me is like I tried to warn a lot of people about these kinds of things, and nobody listens to me. I don't know if I would have listened to someone trying to warn me either. You know, um, I don't know if you know this, but like I was opposed to the escrow.
Oh yeah,
I opposed,
really?
yeah, yeah, I opposed it, and I'll tell you
I
the reason. It's the
remember you
same
saying
thing. It's like,
something about who knows, we might need it here.
right. It may turn out that the escrow commits us to a certain release schedule, and it may turn out, 4 years from the time we begin the escrow, that release schedule makes no sense,
Mhm.
and we can't do anything about it. Now that risk didn't really materialize, and I think in retrospect, it probably was a good thing, but it's dangerous to make promises, especially promises you literally can't break, like in the face of uncertainty. I
Yeah.
also think one thing that I learned is in the early days of XRP, we were big on giveaways and lockups and things like that, and incentivizing holding the token. And what I think I've come to learn is that every time somebody sells the token, it goes from somebody who doesn't want to hold it and doesn't really believe in the project to somebody who wants to hold it more and believes in the project more. And so the faster you get, so people who receive a token in an airdrop, or people who got XRP like in the giveaway, they may be true believers in the project, or they may just be people who are just waiting for what they think is the best selling opportunity. Many of them will just sell immediately because they don't have the mind space to like think about. They're like, I don't know about this Flare thing. I got it for free. I'm not going to turn down free money, but and there's probably a lot of people selling their Flare just because, hey, I have money now that I didn't have yesterday. Yay me. So I think like the faster you get the token in the hands of believers in the project, the better. And I'll say one last thing, which is airdrops in proportion to your holding make no sense to me. They're just monetary inflation. Especially with this proposal, all you have to do is wrap your flare. If you put your flare on an exchange, they're going to wrap it. I mean, wrapping is
Yeah.
one button.
Mhm.
So it's basically just monetary inflation. I don't see how it's an incentive. I don't see how monetary inflation is an incentive to hold. But
I,
maybe I'm missing something.
I also, I found another thing that I thought was sort of odd that that I'm voting. I get to vote on this proposal, but it appears the weight of my vote is related to how much flair I hold, right?
Right.
That if at some level that seems sensible, and some level that seems totally silly. Um,
Yeah.
but it's like, ooh, maybe I should only vote 10% or something. I don't know. I'm going to vote it because the first thing you got to do is see the process work, right? And nothing makes you improve faster than making mistakes, right? So
You
you
just
put
hope you
this,
don't destroy things in the process.
yeah,
And I don't think
and I
I
think
don't think there's any
this
risk of
proposal
that.
number one is literally proposal number one. And there's going to be proposal number two and proposal number three and proposal number four. And so the idea that if this one fails, the whole project goes down. You're like, no, there's going to be a proposal number two, and it's going to be better than proposal number one because you got experience now. And but you've got to start to, if it's really a community process, you got to get the community involved. You got to see the whole process work, and it'll go badly, and it'll go differently than you expect. That's like the lesson learned from Ripple, right? It's like we
Yeah.
certainly knew exactly how things were going to go, and
Yeah.
they totally went in different directions.
Trying to plan more than 6 months out. I mean, there's nothing wrong with doing that because you should do that because you shouldn't do something today if you have no idea like what sets you up for in the future. But just understand that any of your plans more than 6 months out are written in pencil at best.
Exactly. Hey, David, I think Janet wanted to say something.
Ooh. Hey.
Hey, tell Tracy hi for me, and
I
someday
I
we're
will
gonna
do that.
visit again.
Yeah, we miss you guys.
I enjoyed that.
So yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I don't know. Everybody wants to listen to our sickly sweet thing, but
Actually, Bob, we do want to listen to that. It's strangely entertaining.
I just wanted to ask, David, are you going to vote on the proposal? And if so, which way?
You asking me?
Yes.
I haven't decided yet. I'm leaning towards voting yes, but it may not be for the reason that you think, which is I think it's worse. I think yes is better than no for Flair. I'm not super pleased with either. Honestly, I don't think that either is a great choice for the long-term evolution of the network. But obviously, as Bob said, there's time to fine-tune it later. But I think on balance for Flair, yes is better than no. And I don't feel like I should be voting on Flair based on the interests of that's just XRP holders. I know it feels bad that yeah, I should be trying to hold Flair to the what are perceived as promises, but having been in that position, I want Flair to succeed. I want a healthy ecosystem, and I'm willing to set aside the personal stuff because I don't think first of all, if I thought that it was like fraud and he was like trying to get the XRP people to support his project with the intention of abandoning them at the first moment, I would just sell my Flare and never touch the ecosystem again or something. I mean, I wouldn't try to make Flare give more to XRP holders. That just doesn't feel like the right course to me. So I think I'm probably leaning towards voting yes, but it's not because I think the proposal is brilliant tokenomics. I think it's probably better than the tokenomics of voting no, because the tokenomics of voting no is essentially that XRP holders can't get there'll be a constant dribble of tokens to people who may just be immediate dumpers because they're not interested in the ecosystem, and that's bad. One thing I learned with XRP is in the early days we thought lockups would be good. Like you would lock up someone's XRP so they can't sell it for 3 years. But then what happens is if 3 months later they're like, we don't want XRP, they just mark their calendar and on the 3-year date, they just dump it. And so what winds up happening is you have all this built-in future selling pressure. And it comes out to be a lot. There's a lot of this built-in future selling pressure, and it screws over the people who don't get any of that. Like they buy Flare with their hard-earned money, and then they get diluted by people who have no interest in the ecosystem. So putting on my I want the Flare ecosystem to succeed and be healthy hat, I think yes is the better vote than no. Assuming there's no future changes, assuming it's going to be yes forever or no forever, there's going to be no proposal to. I think yes is better than no, and I think better is better.
David,
So I think yes.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't that the point of contention that caused Jed to leave Ripple, was the handling of dropping XRP?
I I think that's his side of the story. Um, I think that's his side of the story, and as evidence to back it up, like when Stellar formed, Stellar tried to do all of the things but they failed at them too. I mean, we were trying to do that, and we failed, and we said this isn't working. And I don't know, maybe Jed never tried to really pressure us to continue, although he did. I guess he did want us to continue. He never really pressured for it, but he did try to do those things at Stellar. And I don't know if you know the story of Stellar's first giveaway, but it was a disaster.
Oh, I'm all ears, David.
No, I don't remember all the details, but I do remember that more than 50% of the tokens they gave away, I think it was done on Facebook or something. It was done on like a major social media platform. I think like more than 50% of the tokens they gave away wound up in 3 accounts, and they believe those 3 accounts belong to the same person.
Well, that's okay because they solved it all by burning half of their total supply. So that was
You know what? What's weird to me is that had no effect. Well, two things about that. First of all, that had almost no effect on the price of the token, which get an economist to explain that. And the other weird thing is, and this bothers me to this day, they burned the supply they were supposed to be giving away, not the supply that they were going to use for their own funding. So actually, that proposal increased the percentage of the token supply held by the foundation.
I don't know exactly why they did that, but I do remember you responding to him, and it was pretty snarky and very funny. I forget exactly what you said, but you said something like, "If all else fails, we'll make sure we try that." Or I don't know if you remember.
Yeah. You know what, though? Reading back that thread, and I've read it once a couple years later, I feel a little bad about that because I really was being snarky and I really wasn't addressing the points that he was making in that thread. So it's one of those threads that it's funny and snarky, but usually I'm funny and snarky, but I also will address the substantive point someone's making strong, and if I'm wrong, I'll say so. And I didn't really address the points he was making in that thread. It's one of the very few interactions that I don't particularly feel good about. I wrote some of those tweets when I was kind of angry. So,
Your
I just
your contrition is in this moment, and your contrition that I've seen in other moments on Twitter, and also Bob Way and other people that I've seen with Ripple as well. Actually, it makes me root for you guys so much more. It's actually made you guys so likable. You see different moments like that, and you think, wow, these really are people with some morality.
and if I'm wrong, it doesn't help me. If I'm wrong and you believe me, there's more wrong people, and I lose the opportunity to do the thing that's actually going to work. You know what I mean? So
Yeah,
I want to be less wrong.
it's a really hard space, and you really want to be less wrong. And it's
Yes.
really, really hard because you're always convinced you're right. And
And
you
I
really have
tell
to
people
search to be wrong.
I tell people at Ripple all the time, like someone will ask me a question and I'll give them an answer and I'll say, but I could be wrong. And if you take my word for it, you asking me this question has done the very opposite of helping you. And of course, at Ripple, I have a tremendous amount of respect. So I'm always worried that I don't know if you saw, I made a tweet about this, that like some people talk about how like it's a good characteristic in people, particularly in managers, that they're very, very confident in what they're doing and their ability to succeed and everything. And there's nothing wrong with confidence in your own ability. But the problem is, like, one of the things that I dread is that somebody who works, with me or for me is going to figure out something wrong that we're doing and not raise that because it'll be perceived as like a lack of confidence in like the strategy. But the strategy could have problems, like this, where one of the ways that you get into trouble is you form a strategy and then the world changes and you don't realize that the thing that your strategy was based on changed. Because we're in a rapidly changing space. And so I have a lot of sympathy for projects that, have to pivot. And I feel bad, for the people, Bob will tell you, like when Ripple's first strategy was everybody use the XRP ledger for everything, which really isn't a strategy, right? If you don't know what you're not, you don't know what you are. But then we said, hey, Ripple's going to be good at is getting institutional payments and building software so that, financial institutions can settle with the cryptocurrency. To some extent, we abandoned the XRP Ledger ecosystem. And I felt really bad about that because there were projects that like we were supporting and helping, and then we're like, oh, we're going to go off and do this other thing. And we didn't have the money or the resources to do both. 2014, 2015. And Bob will tell you, like, there are people who we kind of screwed over a little bit.
It was horrible. I hated
Oh,
that.
were you there? Were you one of them?
I wasn't, I was there, when we
Yeah.
did, and like we shut down the client and people were depending on it, and you're like, oh, we literally don't have a solution for you now. We
I
just
feel bad about that. One like Ripple Rest was a project a tool that a lot of those people were using, and we couldn't continue to support it, and there was no alternative. And I feel
that
bad
was
about
my
it. I feel bad.
project. I want to
Well,
strangle the guy who killed it.
hopefully none of them are holding a grudge like Robert De Niro in Cape Fear, with back and doing push-ups.
And I've gone back and apologized, and I said, like, we did what we thought was good for the project, and we did what we thought made sense for us, and we couldn't do everything. It's not that we thought you could succeed without us, and we thought our resources would yield more applied elsewhere, but that doesn't mean that you don't feel bad about it. And I'm sure Hugo like wishes the situation were different than it is, but I mean, if you were him, like, would you make a decision that you honestly believe hurts the long-term success of Flare?
Of course, his primary objective has to be the success and the health of Flare overall. So,
and I hope I made that point. I hope it doesn't look like I'm beating on him, because I'm very sympathetic, but I don't know. I maybe I shouldn't have said anything, but that's not me. It's not me. Love you or hate you, you're gonna know my position on something.
That's David, and I tried to kind of explain my points there too, because I feel like I felt really bad where I made some strong points, and then Hugo basically pointed like, yeah, at this moment I've self-gagged myself, so I can't talk about these topics. I'm like, oh, that's the last thing I wanted.
I know.
Great conversation would be awesome.
I know how awful that is. I mean, obviously, because of the lawsuit, there's some subjects that I have to do that on, and that's the thing about the lawsuit that bothers me the most.
Hey, David. It's Chip from on the chain. How are you?
Great. How are you?
Doing well. Listen, hey, so just out of curiosity, like, what do you think Flare might have done different, or what do you think would have been a better outcome? Like, because I saw a lot of your tweets and stuff and listened to your commentary tonight, but like, what would have been a different way to handle it?
So one thing, I would not have made a promise that executes over a long period of time. So like, either give everybody what they promised immediately, or don't promise. A promise that translates into dripping tokens over time is just a continuous feed of tokens to people who don't want to hold them. And I said that, and I said it's a mistake that Ripple made, and please don't make the same mistake we did. And they made the mistake anyway. So the alternative would have been a one-time airdrop, would have probably been better. And yes, there would be a lot of selling pressure immediately, but then it would be over. It'd be over and done with. Yes, everybody who didn't want the token, would sell it to somebody who wanted it more than they do. And some people would resell it if it continued dropping and, continued rising. But then it would be over in a couple of days, and that would be it. And then the project could inflate its supply however it thought was best for the project. So I think avoiding long-term promises, and this is a lesson, by the way, that a lot of economists understand. Like the Federal Reserve used to say, they used to give very specific things about what they would do. Like they say, we're going to raise the rate by 1% over the next 2 quarters. They don't do that anymore. And the reason they don't do that is if you say what you're going to do, nobody knows what you've taken into account and what you haven't. So if the Fed said, we're going to raise the interest rate by 1 to 2% over the next 2 quarters, and then the jobs numbers are really strong, and everybody's like, did the Fed expect that? We don't know. Are they still going to raise the interest rate, or are they going to do something different? So instead, what they do is they say, we want the unemployment rate to be between this amount, and we plan to adjust inflation to do that. We expect these. And now if you explain your reasoning and your thinking, then people can say, okay, the jobs number was more than expected. Now, what is the Fed going to do in that? Oh, it's less than expected. If you explain your reasoning and your thinking, rather than making more specific promises, people better understand what you're going to do, and they don't worry as much that if something unexpected happens, you're going to do something they didn't expect. And so the answer is try to avoid specific promises and more talk about what your goals are, what techniques you plan to use them, and what drivers will cause you to change what you're going to do. To the best of your ability. Obviously, it's not going to be perfect. So that's the lesson that wasn't learned, but that should have been learned. And
Well,
by the way, Ripple had to learn. Ripple didn't learn that lesson from the Fed or economists either. It's like after we learned that lesson, I did some research. It's like, oh wow, economists have known this for decades.
But do you think that comes down to more human nature? Like, for example, we repeat the history, we repeat the mistakes over a given period of time. So, given the fact that you knew that at Ripple you went through that same sort of ordeal, and you know, hey, I'm trying to give you a warning. Don't do the same mistake we did. But do you think that some of that comes down to human nature? I mean, is part of that? Do you think that's part of it?
Hubris, yeah, and we tend to have more confidence in our predictions because most of the time the world doesn't change that much. Most of the time it stays the same. Like you can plan, a 12-year-old can plan where they're going to go to college, probably. But we're operating in a space that's very different from that, and it takes a while to learn that, I guess. Like I said, economists have known it for decades, and we had to learn it through painful experience. So,
yeah, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I was brought up early on the example of the airdrop, and I do think it should have all been done very early and very quickly and gotten over with. But Bitcoin Cash, when they did the first essentially airdrop because it was a fork, I mean, we distributed these coins to people that didn't even want them, people that hated us.
Right.
They got these coins, and they dumped them or didn't dump them, and they managed to survive. They transferred pretty quickly.
Right. Everybody's like, this shitty project is going to drop to zero immediately. I want to sell before that happens. Race to sell. And it was a self-fulfilling prophecy. The price crashed, but then the token was in the hands of people who wanted to hold it.
I think they could have made like an American Gladiators competition for those who wanted the coins, and then could have gotten revenue from television. That's just personally what I think.
You should talk to Hugo about it. It's not too late. Make a proposal.
I do have a serious question for you guys, though. What's your opinion? Because there's a lot of people. There was one guy who tagged me yesterday, and my heart went out to him. He said how he's gotten screwed over because he did certain things and he lives in the U.S. Not everyone's self-custodied, and so there were people who, like the instance this guy gave, and I remember this Bitstamp said we are going to honor the Flare snapshot. And so a lot of people held, and I think Bitstamp was the first exchange that even offered XRP, I think. And so a lot of people, they held their tokens, I don't know how many, but there was a significant amount on Bitstamp. They had their snapshot, and for those in the US, they thought everything was fine. The Ripple lawsuit came down in December 2020, and I think people still probably thought they were fine because they were promised that snapshot would be honored. Well, this guy says that he's not getting any from Bitstamp, and I looked it up, and yeah, indeed, Bitstamp is saying, well, due to regulatory concerns, we're not dropping any Flare. And so a lot of people are really hurt by that. They did nothing themselves per se. You can say, oh, you should have self-custody, but they didn't really do anything wrong.
No, that I think they may have I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but I mean, it's not impossible for them to give people their Flare, and it's not clearly illegal. They're just saying the regulatory risk is not a risk we want to take. But I mean, if you owe me $50, you can't say to me, "Hey, I don't want to take the regulatory risk of paying you." You know what I mean? You know what I mean? Like,
and that's what I was thinking too. And they're not explaining what the risk is. And then you have, and I think Bitstamp, is UK based, I think, but Uphold is also, I think their headquarters is also in the UK, I think. But Uphold is honoring it, and they're giving people their Flare, but not Bitstamp, and they're not really explaining it. So and
it's not clearly illegal, right? Like, obviously, if they promised to do something and it subsequently became illegal, that would be a different story. But it's not clearly illegal. It's just they don't want to take the risk. I'm not a lawyer, but like I don't believe that that's an excuse to not make good on a promise.
And yeah,
I'm surprised at Bitstamp too in that, because
yeah.
I trust those guys.
Hey,
You know,
Well, they
you
might.
guys
Yeah,
probably know those guys.
I do. I know Nate's and Damian pretty well.
yeah,
Uh,
Nate's I think is not there anymore. I was talking to NA
oh, that's right.
in
That's
there,
right.
but so that, you know, now I'm favoring GateHub a little bit more because I got to see
Part of
NA
it,
last month.
part of it could be that the new leadership is like, doesn't have the same. They're not unwilling. They don't want to terminate lines of business, but they don't have the passion that that the previous. That's sad.
Yeah,
And it is sad
it.
because, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but there is an account somewhere, just like there is an account somewhere at Coinbase, I know, that has Songbird tokens in it. There is an account somewhere that has the Flare distributed to it as.
We could easily check. If I was at my computer, I'm not at my computer right this second, but if I was at my computer, I could easily check. So you can go to BitHump, enter Bitstamp's XRP Ledger receiving address, the same one that you send to deposit, and it'll have pull up its message key, then enter that message key without the 02 and all the zeros at the beginning. Put a 0x instead of those. Enter it into the Flare Explorer, and you can see. I'll do that and post something on Twitter. I'll do some research and confirm, and we'll see how much Flare they're holding. Because yeah, I mean they're holding it.
They're holding it.
Assuming they are. Assuming they are. They should be. It may be that maybe for all I know, like Flare knew that they weren't going to honor it, and then eliminated them from the airdrop. I don't know. I kind of have to look.
Well, if that.
But if they're holding the Flare, that gives a much stronger cause of action. It's like you have something that you promised to me.
Yes, and the same goes for Coinbase and Songbird. And yeah, if they are, and if they are indeed, if they were wiped off of that list, then that's even worse to me. They should have told people or something. I think people just barely found out that they're not going to honor it. I'd need to ask the guy.